It is a turning point for the global world at large. Hello to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once more. It's another edition of your informative, discursive, and insightful program, Global Insight, on For You, My Dear Africa. Today, we are taking focus on the leadership crisis in France and also analyzing its consequences on the African continent. Aside that, we also want to analyze France's stance on the Russian-Ukraine crisis and how the different opinions regarding the deployment of foreign NATO troops in Kiev for Ukraine is actually causing turmoil or turbulence among member states. It should be noted that France's leadership, Emmanuel Macron, is seemingly facing a myriad of challenges, both from within the nation and on a global stage. The French economy grapples with turbulence, farmer strikes to be precise, and a heightened political uncertainty in the past few years. Regarding France-Africa ties, Macron has found himself entangled in a complex web of issues which pertain to the relationship between France and former colonies in Africa. Moreover, Macron's controversial stance on deploying troops to Ukraine has further strained his relations with fellow NATO members, causing rifts within the alliance. This is the different opinions advocated by member states regarding the deployment of troops in Ukraine, particularly between the US and France. This move may even have more very grave effects on France, as the Russian defense minister has warned via a phone conversation with his French counterpart that, of course, the consequences may be severe for France if they go ahead with the deployment of troops in Ukraine. With all these development, it becomes clear that the outcome of France's leadership crisis may actually reverberate far beyond its borders, particularly impacting African nations. We ask the questions of what implications of France's internal leadership crisis on Africa, what are the implications on the global world at large, and what fates for France and its leadership in the present global dynamics or global changes. You are most welcome again. This is Global Insight. What implications of the internal turbulence in France on African countries, what implication on at the global stage? Welcome once more, ladies and gentlemen. It is Global Insider. We seek to analyze France's leadership crisis, its effect on Africa. We look at the stance of France on the Russian-Ukraine crisis, analyzing the stakes as we see different viewpoints being advocated by member states of NATO regarding the issue of deploying troops in Ukraine. Of course, it's time for us to go into uncovering this panel of experts that will give us the insightful analysis on our program for discussion or our topic for discussion. This day, let me start by acknowledging the presence of ACHILLE, who is a banker and international financial expert joining from the United States of America. Hello to you, Mr. EKEU. It's a pleasure having you this day on For You, My Dear Africa.
Good afternoon, Ms. WIYDORVEN. Good afternoon to all the watchers out there around the world of this program. It's an honor for me to be invited to this table. I think this is a fantastic venue for us to share our views on different situations that are happening in the world. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
And I also extend thanks for accepting this invitation. Like you've underlined, this is a platform, an avenue for us to constructively discuss the issues that are very topical in present day society, and see how we can advocate constructive analysis which can change narratives and see that we have more of peace in the world. Let's also welcome CHRISTELLE, who is editor-in-chief international reporters, just to acknowledge that she has been very critical on issues pertaining the global world, not only in the West, not only in around Europe, but also critical on issues concerning the African continent. And she has practical information and on the ground information or developments pertaining the Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's a pleasure that we welcome you on the Pan-African Media. It is for you, Media Africa, CHRISTELLE.
Thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you today.
Of course, it's very imperative that we get your analysis pertaining our topic for discussion this day. I will write off with you, CHRISTELLE. We are analyzing the leadership crisis or lapses in France, looking at the consequences of it on African countries, and also the stance of France pertinent regarding the Russia and Ukraine crisis. Holistically, what can you say regarding these latest developments which has put the status quo of France on the balance?
We have seen recently, but I mean it's since the beginning of the mandate of Emmanuel Macron, that we can say there is no leadership of crisis in France. It seems that the French president is doing improvisation permanently. So one day he's saying something, the day after he will say something completely different when it's not the complete opposite. And that's a big problem, because it means you cannot rely on what he's declaring, what he's saying. We see that it has huge consequences. It gives a big uncertainty in terms of international relationships, because of course people who are in contact with him don't know on which foot they have to dance, you know, because one day we say white, the second day we say black, and then we say green, and you don't know what is the real position. So that's a big problem, and I think that's why now France is completely losing its role in terms of international policy.
Is the role of France, especially in foreign policy, as far as the latest development across the global world are concerned. I will come back to you subsequently. CHRISTELLE, let's continue, of course, with Mr. EKEU with a background and holistic presentation of this topic for today, pertaining the leadership in France, the consequences on the African continent. Let's listen to you, Mr. EKEU.
Thank you. France is a former colonial power that has long maintained a complex and influential relationship with Africa, particularly with its former colonies. However, in recent years, this relationship has come under increasing strain as France grapples with a leadership crisis that threatens to undermine its standing on the continent. The roots of this crisis are multifaceted, stemming from France's colonial legacy. It's often contradictory policies towards Africa and growing resentment among African populations. Despite efforts by French President Emmanuel Macron to reset relations with Africa, moving away from the paternalistic French-Afrique model and engaging more with civil society, these initiatives have had limited success in the face of deep-seated mistrust and competing influences from countries like Russia and China. The crisis has been particularly acute in the Sahel region, where France has been militarily engaged in fighting jihadist groups for over a decade. Despite some tactical successes, the security situation has continued to deteriorate, leading to a series of military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger that have overthrown France-backed governments. These coups have been accompanied by strong anti-French sentiments and calls for France to withdraw its troops. France's waning influence in Africa represents a historic shift with potentially far-reaching consequences. It raises questions about the future of economic, monetary, and security ties between France and its former colonies, as well as the broader geopolitical balance on the continent. As France grapples with this leadership crisis, it faces the challenge of fundamentally reimagining its engagement with Africa. This will require a new approach based on partnership, mutual respect, and a genuine reckoning with the colonial past. It will also necessitate greater coordination with African partners and the international community to address the complex challenges facing the continent, from security and governance to economic development and climate change. The stakes are high, as instability in Africa, particularly in the Sahel, has global ramifications. How France navigates this leadership crisis and whether it can forge a new, more equitable relationship with Africa will have profound implications for the future of both France and the African continent.
Absolutely, how France navigates the present situation, patterning its relationship with the African continent is something of utmost importance to see how it can do this given the changing dynamics. Mr. Eke, I stay with you, and how can you say has the internal situation in France, has it actually changed? So maybe since maybe after 2022, patterning the developments that occurred, especially between France and Africa, and even internally, because it should be noted that France actually witnessed a series of protests coming from farmers and even from workers and nationals that decried the dying economic situation of the country?
Well, there are several challenges that France is facing right now. Those are challenges and uncertainties as well. The first one is on the political front. The rise of the populist and far-right movement has fragmented the political landscape in France, making it harder to build consensus and implementing long-term policies. This could lead to instability and inconsistency in France's foreign policy, including its approach to Africa, as we've seen. On the economic front, there are concerns. France is facing economic challenges like slow growth, high unemployment, and public debt, right? So this could limit its ability to provide financial assistance and investment to African countries. There are also social unrests in France, meaning we've witnessed protests and strikes over issues like pension reforms and cost of living, that have become more frequent, raising concerns about social cohesion and stability. This internal focus could divert attention and resources away from foreign policy priorities, including in Africa. And there is also the post-colonial legacy. France, colonial history in Africa continues to cast a shadow on its relations with the continent. There are ongoing debates about reparations, restitution of cultural artifacts, and the lingering influence of France in the political and economic sphere of former colonies. So those are the few issues that are really having a serious impact internally in France, and that has consequences externally in Africa.
Thank you for that, Mr. Eke. Coming back to you, Christelle, we are looking at how the situation in France is actually killing or affecting its relationship with the African continent. We know that present-day Africa has seen a greater revolution at every front, especially how countries are redefining their foreign relations and, of course, their diplomatic relations. So the question I'm directing to you is, how is the situation in the French economy changing after the partial loss of the control over the former colonies in Western and Central Africa?
But we see that the relations with former colonies were not that bad with previous presidents. The problem is not more about what France is losing in Africa, which affects the relationships. It's the contrary. It means it's the direct destruction of the relationships with African countries, which led to the loss of the resources to which France had access in the former colonies. And we see that especially with Emmanuel Macron. He has absolutely no respect for presidents of African countries with whom he's discussing. We have seen that several times. There were, I think, many scandals about that. I think your audience already know about that. He speaks to African presidents like if they were just like cleaners or employees of cleaning teams. It's really terrible. And the situation where France is more and more losing its grip on Africa is mainly due to this catastrophic foreign policy of France, which continues to think that she's a big, powerful center of power in the world that can dictate its will to the world, to the other countries, and especially the former colonies. But it's not the fact. And the tone with which, for example, Emmanuel Macron is speaking to African leaders has led to this loss of grip and loss of resources that France was obtaining through, for example, the franc CFA in some African countries. So the internal situation in France is not affecting the situation with Africa. It's more the arrival of Emmanuel Macron at the head of the state, which led to this really catastrophic destruction of ties between France and Africa.
Being conversant with the latest development or the point that marked the France-Africa ties, and of course with the new revelation how this France's legacy across the African continent helped to kill the economies of the African state, and of course particularly in nations of the Sahel region. We can acquaint ourselves with the Operation Backen that wasn't able to attain the objective of wiping out terrorism in Mali and elsewhere across the region. Still with you, Christelle. Now that we are conversant with this, and of course the African continent has realized, and we can see from the categorical decisions taken to send out French troops and even the U.S. troops from African soil. And now the point is, what do you think can African nations faced with this crisis can capitalize? What are the stakes which can define their foreign policies in present-day society in regards to creating new alliances of international relations to avoid the consequences of France's presence in Africa with other countries?
Yeah, we see now a big rise of the sovereignty of African countries, a real sovereignty. We had the decolonization, but we have seen with some instruments that the former colonizators had kept some power in Africa for decades, and they have used corruption, they have used chaos. We know that they even used murder to avoid having African leaders who could resist, to these attempts to keep control on African countries. But now we see that African countries are saying it's enough, and it's a very good thing. I think the African countries first should really work on reinforcing their sovereignty at maximum. It means, of course, avoiding external fiduciary money like the franc CFA, because the one who is controlling the money is the one who is controlling the economy of the country. And if you don't control your economy, you're not sovereign. So I think the first big step for the African countries is really to retake fully their sovereignty, because it's only like this that after they can define first its political model which suit them, and it's not necessarily the Western ones. And I think it should not be the Western ones. And from this basis, they should then build or decide to participate to alliances with other countries on the continent or outside, which fits their interests. And for this, they should always keep in mind that they should only build alliances with other countries which first respect them, respect their sovereignty, and discuss with them as equals. Definitely, African countries should not discuss with countries who will repeat the same scheme of colonies and colonizators. Definitely, and I think already inside the African continent, I think it's possible already to build alliances between perhaps neighbor countries who have common interests, perhaps beginning by some military alliances, to help fighting, for example, these terrorist groups, because we know that some of them are present at the frontier of 2-3 countries, which are neighbors. So I think it's really a big step, and first it's really regaining completely their sovereignty. And they should, for that, really escape from all these instruments like the franc CFA, like the IMF, who are controlling countries through money and through the debt. That's really, I think, for me, a very big step to achieve.
Indeed, it's about defining a positive agenda that will prosper the African continent in the new world order. Time for us to acknowledge the presence of ARNAUD DEVELAY, a political consultant who is joining the conversation just now. Hello to you, Mr. DEVELAY. It's a pleasure having you this day on For You Media Africa.
Hello, Clarice. Thank you very much for
Mr.
having
DEVELAY.
me. Yes, can you hear me?
Sure, I can hear you. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Of course, you just joined. We were analyzing the leadership crisis in France and how it's affecting Africa, and also France's stance regarding the Russian-Ukraine crisis as regards the deployment of NATO forces in Ukraine. So the question I will send to you this particular moment is will dwell, of course, on the future of France. What do you think is the fate of France given its present state of affairs with African countries?
Well, to be sure, we stand at a crossroad right now. As Christelle mentioned, all the ties that have existed between France and its former colonies were predicated on the special relationship which successive French presidents managed to keep. And this bore on a certain understanding of African culture, despite the appearance to the contrary. And with Emmanuel Macron, obviously, we have stepped into something which is quite a departure from that line of presidents. Macron represents, above all else, the oligarchy, the French oligarchy, and he was groomed to basically preside over a dismantling of France proper. And in that sense, the action that he has carried himself through the last 7 years is a testament to this destruction of France, first and foremost. How does that connect now with the Ukraine conflict? Well, if we go by the recent statements issued by French senior officials and Macron's own statement and pronouncements on the potential deployment of French troops in or near the theater of operation, we can conclude that we have entered the final stage of this destruction of the French state, as it were. And this connects with Africa, of course, because Macron does not look kindly to the Russian Federation having carefully tread some new relationship in Africa, first with the so-called Wagner Group, and now with the Russian Afri Corps. And in that respect, he takes it almost personally as an affront to himself. And instead of looking inward and engaging in some kind of introspection as to why African countries are suddenly deciding en masse to look elsewhere to develop their multilateral relationships with other states, we can see that he does not take it kindly, and we can somewhat make a correlation between this bellicose statement that appears to be emanating from Paris in as far as the Ukrainian situation is concerned, with that very loss of power and influence that France is experiencing right now in Africa.
You actually compared the situation in Africa and that happening in Ukraine, Mr. DEVELAY. And let me try to correlate the two events. Do you think that the situation in France in this 2024 is in any way similar to the situation in Ukraine that was in 2014, when the people actually did not believe in the possibility of armed conflict, and that they would be led to slaughter on the slogans of the European dream and demonization of Russia? What is your perspective on this when you look at the two events, France and of course Ukraine in 2014, I beg your pardon.
Yes, indeed. It's a very relevant and pertinent comparison. Let's look at the numbers. France is indebted to the tune of $3,000 billion. It basically has to service 50% of its annual budget to pay the interest of the debt. De facto, France is thus a property of the great investment funds such as BlackRock and Vanguard. And so there's not much of a political will in France, as opposed to the representative of the oligarchy, which is Macron. Macron represents the interest of BlackRock in France. And all these policies are essentially predicated on putting into effect the complete takeover of what used to be a sovereign country 50 years ago to become some kind of asset in the hands of those investment funds. And so as a result, obviously, we cannot expect decision-making process to reflect the best interest of the French people, but rather contribute to advancing the interest of those oligarchic interests at the continental level. And obviously, and this takes us now to Ukraine, those very same interests have invested immensely in Ukraine. We can say as of today that 2/3 of the agricultural land, the richest agricultural land in Ukraine, is de facto property of those investment funds. Zelensky, when he got into power, actually proceeded to reform internal law allowing foreign interest to get their hands on some of the juiciest bits and morsels of the Ukrainian economy. This goes back to 2014 and the concept of what we have come to know as external management. The concept of external management was first coined by former Ukrainian MP Andrei Derkash when he released those tapes, which we know now were leaked by the Zelensky administration as a means of leverage with Washington. But suffice it to say that among some of the revelations contained within those tapes, there are issues bearing on the takeover of former state-owned companies by foreign interest, by allowing the board of administration to be staffed with foreigners. This is the law 3602, which was adopted in February 2016 at the behest of the Biden vice president at the time. Biden was heard basically showing his concern and his interest in making sure that law was to be passed. This was the case. And interestingly enough, we actually find internationally known figures such as Dominic Strauss-Kahn, among others, to be sitting a member of some of the most influential and valuable formerly state-owned company. So this is pretty much the same situation that is now befalling France. Macron was, some of our listeners recall, one of the main architects, for instance, of the selling out to the American General Electric of Alstom, the nuclear energy company. And so now what made France, for instance, one of the key aspects of France's former sovereignty was its ability to sell nuclear technology to foreign states. And in so doing, by selling the reactor, the most important aspect of reactor technology to the General Electric, U.S. General Electric, it means now that anytime the time comes to replace some of the key components of this technological chain to other countries doing like maintenance work or updating the equipment, France, or Alstom as it were, under pretty much U.S. control now, has to seek permission from the Americans. So this is but one example, but former Minister of Labor Arnaud de Montebourg quickly passed into review a series of former French assets, strategic assets, which were likely in a similar way sold to the Americans. So basically, this is the same situation that we see in Ukraine. France has completely been taken over. It's an external management operation as well. And now that we are deep into the aftermath of the 2014 Ukraine coup, that the special military operation has revealed and exposed NATO's intrinsic weakness, and that the organization is facing strategic defeat in Ukraine, there are now serious talks about deploying French troops on the ground to try to salvage some of the investment that those U.S. or should say globalist interests have invested into. And so France is not France anymore. France is some kind of extension of this oligarchical monopoly. It has nothing to do with the country that we might have known even, let's say, 20 years ago. And so it's unfortunately, to make a long story short, France is in a similar situation than Ukraine was in 2014. The process of the internal infiltration has really gone deep now, and we can expect that everything will be exploited to the fullest on the French side to basically illustrate how much the country does not belong to itself anymore, but belongs to offshore interest. And if this means sacrificing French troops to somewhat entertain the illusion that they can delay the military situation on the ground in Eastern Europe, unfortunately, they are mistaken. And this will lead, as we have heard some Russian senior officials said, to French militaries coming back in coffins, essentially.
That explains the complex nature of the situation on the ground, patterning the development across the global world. In line with what Mr. Devley just underlined, Mr. EKEU, we are looking at the fate of the French troops and even non-combat personnel that the French government anticipates sending to Ukraine as far as the question of deployment of forces is concerned. What do you see? What will French citizens should do you think it's a right thing that the French citizens die for in Ukraine? What do you think they should die for in Ukraine?
This is a very sad situation. This country called France that used to be a beacon of hope and freedom, and all the claim that they used to put out there for everybody to feel okay. This is of human rights nation and all that stuff. It's just all crumbling, and we are witnessing this crumbling of this powerful country that used to be, a very interesting country to visit, and it's just the leadership in France has been in decay for years, right? So, and that for me, when I look at the situation, I feel like France doesn't know where it's going. They have no foreign policy that you can really read. It's all confusing. They are into this situation where one day they say one thing to please some group of people. I don't know who they are. Maybe it's the US, maybe it's their own insiders or people in Africa. And then the next day they say exactly the opposite. We've seen that, with Macron going to China, saying one thing, NATO or US shouldn't be dragging, Europe or France into, not into some crazy wars with China. They don't want that. And then the next day to turn around and do the same thing and change. Same thing with Israel. When it comes to Africa, we hear a situation where we have coup d'etat in Mali that is not accepted by France, and then another coup d'etat in Chad that is accepted by France. It's just double talk. Nobody understands where they're going. And when we look at this, the rise of the new leader in Senegal, the young 44-year-old new president, Mr. Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who was who sworn yesterday, and no French official was invited, right? So you see that Africa, as one of the other guests mentioned, Africa is looking for its own independence now. It's trying to drive France and the European people completely out of the political life of those African countries nowadays. And this is thanks to a renewed Pan-Africanism movement that has been ongoing for the past maybe 10 years. And it started with some media that really put a lot of emphasis on educating African populations. And so the result today is, people in Africa have no fear have no fear of those powerful countries anymore. All these leaders, they feel like, they have been bamboozled in the past and they don't want to go through that again. And there are two dates for me that really have a significant impact on the changes that we are witnessing today. 2011, with the killing of Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, that's one situation that led to the flow of terrorists in the Sahel region that really put those countries in a situation where they had to call for France, for example, in the case of Mali, to come and help. They were very welcome. People were singing and dancing when French troops came to Mali to help fight those terrorists. And what happened is they overstayed. And what happened is the population started feeling that, the country was invaded. When they first came in, it was only 10 or 20% of the country that were invaded by those terrorists. And by the time they had to expel French troops, it was like 85% of the country that was, taken by terrorists. And the current president, Assimi Goïta, who was among the elite fighters in the Mali forces, was one of the people that were prevented from going into, the strongholds of the terrorists. And so, they were prevented, and that was a turning point for those people. They decided that, well, what is going on? Why is France preventing them from, taking out all these terrorists in their strongholds? And they start, thinking maybe France was sponsoring or protecting those terrorists for its own benefit. The benefit here was the division of Mali in two different states. And so that was unacceptable. So that's why we see this coup d'etat that happened in Mali. And then from there, everybody started thinking, wait a minute, maybe France is doing this on purpose. So it happened in Burkina Faso and then in Niger, as we know today. So this is a revolution that happened because of the distrust that people have, in French troops. So I think militarily, France in a difficult position today. They want to go to Ukraine. They're claiming that they're going to send troops to Ukraine to do what? With what? They don't have anything to last for a week. No weapons, nothing to last for a week of war. They have nothing. It's just all talk. So I don't believe any of that. I think Macron is trying to show himself as somebody who is a different leader, military leader, or whatever. He thinks he's going to be a De Gaulle or anything like that. It's just, completely. So nobody believes that. So pretty much, my thought is it's just, they're just talking, trying to impress the world that they can do anything in Ukraine. They have sent weapons. They have sent everything that they got. They all destroyed. So what is left? And when you look at the economy in France, we have $3,000, 3,000 euro, 3,000 billion euros of debt. Okay, so that is a crushing debt for that country. They don't know how they're going to be able to get out of that debt. And with African resources straying away from them, with what we see today with all these silent countries that are pulling away from France, kicking France out, they used to have free resources they could get from Africa with the French CFA, all these things that they put in place, all these leaders that they chose to put in place to do their bidding. All these things are being destroyed today, and they have nowhere to turn. As Mr. Putin said last time, Macron's behavior it could be, we can explain that as the fact that they're losing Africa, they're losing the continent, and that's why he's going crazy, because this country is going to go into some difficult turmoil very soon. So let's see what's going to happen, but I don't think French can do anything when it comes to Ukraine. I don't think it can change anything in Africa. African continents have turned away from France, and we are looking for people that we can do business with, winning in a win-win situation. And this is all happening across Africa today.
Indeed, it is what is happening across the African continent today. From your analysis, we can see that the consciousness of the African people, actually, especially in the fragile Sahel region, has led to what we have today as this strong political revolution in Africa, and also the fact that African countries have started understanding the international politics and how it works. It has helped to define a new path for the continent of Africa. Talking about African resources, and now coming back to you, Christelle, we are looking at African resources, and we know that the Niger's uranium was very instrumental for France in terms of its nuclear plants and so on and so forth. So now the question is, what are the EU's energy prospects if France actually loses access to this precious uranium from the African state of Niger, given that in recent times the ties between France and this country something that we cannot really comprehend. It's becoming more complicated.
The problem is not only France could lose access to uranium from Niger, but the thing is that with the bad relationship with Russia, it could also lose this source of uranium. So I think the prospects is really bad, because we see that, as I said, Emmanuel Macron has destroyed completely the foreign policy of France. And now they are losing access to the resources which are at the very basis of any economy, which is energy. First, they have lost the Russian cheap gas with the destruction of the Nord Stream. Now they will perhaps lose access to uranium from Africa, and they could lose also from Russia. And the problem is, in Europe, they have planned everything on the idea of replacing all these energies by renewable ones, which is not working at all. We can see it. As a result, in Germany, for example, they are opening new thermal electric plant to replace all the nuclear ones that they have closed. And so I think the prospects are really bad, because without energy, you cannot have a functioning economy. So if France is losing access to Nigerian uranium and perhaps the Russian ones, then the consequences will be really bad, because in France, it's like around 75% of electricity is made from atomic electrical plant. So without this resource, France will be deprived on an very important part of its electricity. And we don't see how its economy could survive without it. The problem is, in France, they also try to close nuclear plants, and we don't know with what they will replace it. And again, all these renewable energies, it's also something which is consuming a lot of resources that France doesn't have. It's consuming a lot of metals that France doesn't have. It's consuming a lot of rare earth that France doesn't have. And the more Emmanuel Macron is staying at power in France, the more he's destroying the foreign relationships of France with a lot of countries which are important for France to obtain these resources. So from my point of view, France is now going in a very bad tendency, declining tendency. We can see and we can say it, and it's not the only one. I think the whole Europe is going on such a tendency, because they have not taken their last decisions during the last years, taking into account all the parameters. They have not thought about what would happen after tomorrow. They have no long-term plans, no long-term reflection, and I think it would lead to a catastrophe for all the European countries and especially France.
Christelle, Arnaud Davely, in the same perspective, Christelle, while talking, highlighted the fact that the present leadership in France and the decisions that it is taking is hampering France's future, especially its diplomatic life. Now, to you, Mr. Davely, do you think there is a chance that civic consciousness will arise again in the, I call it, let me term it, the homeland of the Great Revolution, and of course, what actually prevents people from demanding free will?
Well, that's what the American call the $64,000 question. You have to understand one thing, fundamental thing, as far as France is concerned. France is the only country where it is actually not looked favorably to exhibit one's pride in national history. So for the last 50 years, ever since what I consider being the first colored revolution, Charles de Gaulle was deposed, or at least forced a year later to exit the reins of power. The country has been in the grips, ideologically speaking, by the deconstructionist, the structural thinker and pseudo-philosopher of the far left. And they basically proceeded to vilify public consciousness about one's belonging to a larger whole. And we've undergone a lot of social engineering measures. I won't get here into the school of thoughts behind it, but suffice it to say that France as the archetype of the non-aligned power of the 1960s is a fading memory now. So this being said, the demographics of France sees the country essentially hostage to a voting bloc of people of retirement age. And those very people who were in the streets in May 1968 calling for sexual freedom in the dorms of university. Mind you, they were not asking for bread like in Vietnam or in Cambodia. They were asking for sexual liberation. So those people are the ones now that are, for some of them, holding the levers of power, economic, political, artistic, media. And there's actually a saying that it's not only a demographic way of thinking, the baby boomer demographic group, but also that their way of thinking has all in and of itself become a way of thinking espoused by younger people in France. And those people actually are content, although their base is increasingly shrinking, with, this kind of take the day as it comes. Don't plan 25, 30 years down the future like de Gaulle used to do it. Those people are just navigating, through the fog and somehow trying to adapt to the changing conditions. And so this is a major problem we have here. There's often the elements of language we hear when some people in France try to dispel, for instance, the notion that France is a safe country, which it is not. The French state has completely abandoned its primary mandate, the prime directive of protecting its own constituents. No one is in security in France, and there is such an ideological bias in the way punishment is administered, for instance, that criminal elements from the bottom have come to mesh with criminal elements from the top in ensnaring the silent majority in the middle. And in the middle, you have this very organized voting bloc, the boomer generation, which, sure enough, quite a substantial amount of them are heading toward the door. But for another, part of them, they're still pretty much in their, late 60s, early 70s. And owing to the progress in medicine, a lot of them are living very productive life. I mean, they're not working anymore, but they have substantial income. They've accapared all the real estate in France. And they are pretty much, this kind of me generation, and after me, the deluge. They do not care. I mean, they keep, because of their electoral weight, promoting the idea with the leadership that they should be, basically favored over any other segment of the population, including the most productive ones, which have become essentially milking cows now, to keep this social system, which is unsustainable. And so as long as this remains the electoral reality, those demographics are bound to condition basically the way politics works in France for the foreseeable future. When I say foreseeable future, we can say pretty much the next 15 to 20 years for sure. They mobilize themselves on national elections, and they will go and vote. And owing to their increasing numbers now of retirees, it's sufficient for any kind of oligarchical candidate who has been groomed in communicating in a smooth fashion and reassure those people that their little interest will be maintained. This essentially preempts any kind of genuine revolutionary forces from rising. So what we are facing essentially is bankruptcy. The system will, owing to its internal contradiction, believing in free money, believing in social assistance, believing in this état-providence, killing its own productive forces within, or exploiting them to such a degree that many of them, and the flow is increasingly, growing, are seeking their fortune elsewhere. Everyone who has a future, everyone who has a trade, everyone who's just basically growing tired of being taxed into oblivion, leaves France. So what you're going to have at some level, the process always starts very slowly, to be sure, but it is increasing, and increasingly owing to external factors, internal factors, and it's a kind of a slow fuse, which at some point is going to ignite, basically a very explosive situation, because the state, owing to this redistribution scheme, is trying to buy social peace. And so they are basically caving in to increasingly demanding forces, And the problem is also that a lot of them are predicated on identity politics, which we've imported from the United States. So the ideology that was espoused by the U.S. Democratic Party, and promoted by Saul Alinsky, the identity politics perception of how to conduct, to maintain some kind of division among society that you administer, those divisions are being exacerbated more and more. And with bankruptcy looming, we can expect a very explosive cocktail, which will make Lebanon in the 1970s and ex-Yugoslavia in the 1990s look like a walk in the park.
remind our viewers joining in that this is Global Insight on For You Media, and we are analyzing the stakes which have marked the global world in recent times. Today, taking focus on the role of France in all the developments occurring, the consequences on the African continent, and also the consequences at the global stage, even particularly how the decisions made by the present leadership can strain the country's or further strain the country's diplomatic ties with the rest of the world. Coming to you, Christelle, now just in line with the consciousness of the people of France and elsewhere, you know, the latest developments which are occurring at the time of the fourth industrial revolution, and of course the presence of the internet has brought about clear understanding of the stakes. So the question I'm directing to you is, do you think ordinary citizens are capable of joining the fight against what we can call today the new bourgeoisie?
I think in France there is still, unfortunately, a lot of people who are taking their information from the TV, from the mainstream media. Of course, there are more and more people who are now getting information from internet and understanding that the current, let's say, political and mediatic elite in France are not working for the interest of the French people, but there are still a lot of indoctrinated people who believe what the mainstream media and the authorities are telling them. So I think for the moment the French people is not yet ready, but I think they are in a good tendency. We see that more and more people are following alternative media, are going to search for information to other places. And we see that's why also the French authorities are so afraid for now, why they have decided, for example, to censor purely Russian media like Russia Today, like Sputnik. They are even attacking and trying to discredit some Pan-African media who are also doing a great job and trying to present them also like some kind of propaganda tool, because the French authorities understand that they are losing grip on the mind of people in France. Little by little, people are more and more searching for information in alternative sources and less in the mainstream media. And that's why we see now that France, the 2nd of April, so 2 days ago, Mr. Séjourné said during a joint press conference with Mr. With the Department's Secretary of the US, he said that France will propose some law to sanction people who are supporting enterprises, no, it means media, doing disinformation. I mean, what does it mean? I mean, they want to sanction people who support media like Russia Today, like your media, like other alternative media who are talking the truth. I mean, it's already a step to fascism, you know. So we see that now the French authorities are a bit desperate. They understand that they are losing the grip, but they have not yet lost it completely. So they still need some time for the French people to really understand what's really happening. Of course, little by little, the official French propaganda is getting so ridiculous that more and more people understand that it's purely fake. But it takes some time for people to open their eyes and to admit that they have been abused, that they have been manipulated. So I think at some point French people will join, but I don't think they are ready now.
In line with what you've said, Christelle, I stay with you regarding the misinformation or disinformation pertaining the development across the global world. To mark that, if I'm correct, you're one of the journalists who have come together to fight the disinformation coming mostly from Western media, and we want to understand how these will help to change narratives, especially across the African continent. We are looking at how the continent can redefine its foreign policy, its diplomatic ties, based on the practicality of information that is being, of course, relayed to the public, coming from trusted sources. You know, when Mr. Eke was talking earlier on, he lauded France as one of the countries that people in the days who want to visit for various reasons. But today, with the propaganda, especially as Russia-Africa ties have taken a new dimension, a lot of misinformation is surrounding the media. So now, being aware of this, in your perspective, what do you think the political stakeholders in Africa and beyond can put in on the table as the real stakes to defining their diplomatic or international relations with the rest of the world?
I think the information is really important because information is defining the mind of is helping people to decide, to make their own opinion. If you feed them with lies, of course, you will manipulate them. So I think the African leaders should really pay a lot of attention to all this propaganda coming from the Western countries and put effective measures to fight against it. To avoid their people being manipulated by these fake news and disinformation, because it's really serious. We have seen how fake news, for example, in Russia, spread through social networks, were used to provoke it's more than protests. It was already fightings and so on. We had people assaulting an airport, if you remember, in Dagestan, and all was based on fake news. So I think the African leaders, if they want really to be able to have an appeased diplomacy and to be able to define in good condition their foreign policy, should pay a lot of attention to this, because of course the Western countries, they pay a lot of attention to this. They spend billions of euros and dollars in all this propaganda machine to influence the people, not only internally, but also in the countries where they have some interests. And so, of course, we will see more and more attempts, for example, to discredit Russia towards the African audience. So I think really the African leaders should pay a lot of attention to all this propaganda and information work. I think it's important for African countries and African media to work closely with colleagues who are in the ground in Russia, for example, in the area of the special military operation, to build their own network of reliable sources who are on the ground and who can provide them with first-hand information, which is really factual and true. I think that's really important, and I think it will help really avoiding, let's say, sabotage of the diplomatic efforts of African countries by the Western world who want to keep control on these African countries.
Hello, Clarice?
Of course, for the insight, just to inform you, if you are just joining us, you are most welcome. And we are discussing the development around the global world, taking a case study of the development in France, and how the decisions or the leadership crisis is affecting the African continent and the global world at large, and even the effect on the internal situation of France. Let's continue the conversation with you, Mr. EKEU, just in line with the question if there can be a consciousness or where citizens can join the fight against what we can call today the new bourgeoisie. Do you think there are people among, especially elites and opinion leaders, who share the future of their particularly children with France, present France, and would like to build politics for the sake of their citizens and not at the request of the collective West that is seemingly controlling the geopolitical dynamics at the global world?
Well, I don't live in France. I can only, listen to what my other panelists are saying. I think they live in France. They know what's going inside of France very well, better than me. What I would say is, in order for France to, to change what is happening, to change the course, they will need, a new type of leader. And they have to change the way they behave on the world stage and the way they treat other people, especially African presidents, and one of the key issues that African countries have against France is military power, the military bases they have everywhere in Africa. I mean, England was a have colonized so many different countries, but they don't have military bases everywhere. It's just nobody understands why France needs all these military bases, and there are very, very, very negative implications, for African countries to have those military bases. First of all, it perpetuates a neo-colonial relationship with African nations, undermining their sovereignty and interfering in their internal affairs. It fuels anti-French sentiment. Those military interventions and the perceived support for authoritarian regimes can fuel anti-French sentiments and resentment among local populations, as we've seen everywhere in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, and even in Chad, all these places, Gabon. It's insane. It's everywhere. There are risks of escalation. Military operations can escalate conflicts and lead to civilian casualties and potentially creating more instability and resentment. This is one of the cases about Niger where people were killed. The population, people in the population were killed by French troops, and the government did everything to prevent any investigation of what happened. And so this continued to anger those people and those populations, and they don't want to see those bases, those military bases. Same for the U.S. It's the same thing for U.S. bases. African countries have decided they want to enjoy the resources God gave them. Okay, it's been seven centuries now that African countries have been suffering from those colonial powers. 7th century, through slavery, through colonialism, through colonization, through neo-colonization. We've been through so much, and it's time for us to breathe a little bit. We need just some space to breathe. We need France to remove their knees on our necks. It's insane. What country cannot live within its means? We have the impression that France cannot live within its means. They have to find a way to always use other people's resources in order for them to be able to live a better life than others, they don't care about other people, African countries. They don't care about us. So the sentiment has grown to the point where, at this point, we don't want to hear about France anymore. Nothing against the French people, but but mostly about the French oligarchy. These are the people that we are not happy with, and we don't want them to we don't want to do business with them anymore. We want different partners that we can do business with that will allow us to grow our economy, to grow our resources, to use our resources for our own advantage, and to develop our countries. I mean, who wants to stay in this state of poverty forever? Nobody, right? So those leaders, France have to find leaders who are going to get them to understand the reality today, and they have to find ways to live within their means. Because if there's no leader who can show them, hey, the time where we used to go everywhere and just pillage resources and use, that time is past. And when we look at Senegal today, Senegal was one of the closest allies of France for generations. When we see that the new president was swearing the other day, and there was no high minister or president of France that were there at those ceremonies. So that shows how bad the situation is, and that France has to make a 180 degrees change. Otherwise, they're going to keep suffering. But the main thing here is they have to live within their means. They have to find a way to live within their means and treat other people respectfully, because all this arrogance going everywhere, talking down to people, people have had it, okay? So they don't want to hear about all that stuff anymore, and it's time for Africa to wake up. And this is our century.
Africa to wake up, and this is a century, and I'll always reiterate what is Africa's agenda amidst the changes across the global world. We're going to end with you, Mr. DEVELAY, looking at the place of the collective West that has been instrumental as far as the crisis in the world is concerned, and of course looking at the role of opinion leaders and even individuals who can defend the interest of citizens rather than work at the request of this collective West. And of course, the last question is, where can we situate the future of France given this present stakes?
Well, I wish I could be optimistic and give you a happy ending scenario, but unfortunately, France is facing what could be labeled a perfect storm. As I mentioned earlier, the country is indebted to unsustainable level. Freedom of enterprise is something that is somewhat looked cynically by the state as a means to impose hyper-taxation. And at the same time, the country deludes itself at the highest level, that is, into maintaining an ideological model which is not suited for the 21st century. France, and we can fairly say the current leadership, can be actually compared to the Third Republic of the 1870s, 1880s. So the very Republican version, which initiated the colonization of Africa following the fall of Sedan and the defeat to the Prussians. And so we are basically stuck with the ideological descendants of people like Jules Ferry. Basically, I don't see how this is going to end well, because those people, you have to understand, France went through 1,000 years of monarchy and Catholicism. It was a very stable and organic and dialectical osmosis. when the revolution came in 1789, it was a kind of a foreign model that was imposed onto a country that was not predisposed to take it. And so it was the last 230 years have been essentially kind of like France's own version of the Soviet era, under the most ideologically driven and fanatic regime that one can imagine. I often liken France to East Germany in the former Warsaw Pact. France will be the last person to leave the party and turn the light off when the entire Western financial edifice collapses. And so it's not going to happen smoothly, far from it. France is a country, unlike Britain, which has known how to anticipate upheavals and deep transformation to adapt its own political institutions so as to prevent rivers of blood, as we were fond of talking about in the wake of the second Iraq War. France is the land of revolutions. And like Christelle mentioned, the elite are perfectly aware that their grip on power is slipping. And so they are contracting themselves. They are getting more and more rigid in how they portray themselves. And we can see it in how they maintain an iron grip on elements of languages. They create a whole new language. This whole Republican, it's not as much a model of government in France. It's an ideology in and of itself. When you hear French senior official repeating like a mantra, les valeurs de la République, it's like coded words for something that only elites at the highest level believe into. The French masses, by and large, are pretty much reeling from 50 years of brainwashing. The old saying, panem and circus. And so we went from being a nation of thinkers and critical thinkers and attention to detail and favoring rigor in reasoning. And we were the envy of the world, late 60s, in terms of technology. We sent rockets into space. We were the ultimate middle-sized power. We were the bridge between East and West. But we were too independent, and our model represented a threat to the American hegemony or the Anglo-Saxon sphere. And so, not to get too deep into it, but everything was done to essentially erase that model, humiliate it, bring it lower than low, and co-opt its elites through a whole slew of circles like the French-American Foundation, French-American Young Leaders, and all those programs. Most of the elites currently running France emanate from those circles. Then you have the Davos group as well. So, there are no, right now on the radar, there are no real, authentic, organically bred French politician. And those who may somewhat espouse an interesting discourse in as far as what their political platform is about are completely prevented from participating in the political process as such. So this system has complete control. There are absolutely nothing to do if you are trying to change things in a genuine way in France. If you are in France right now, you are, if anything, with time passing by and the clouds of war gathering, you are increasingly physically in danger yourself. Not unlike what de Gaulle did in June 1940, the resistance to this tyrannical regime, this what we call la gueuse républicaine, is outside. The system will not tolerate any dissent and will crush every opponent before they even become, some kind of a potent movement. So I would say that we are going to be obligated to wait for the natural processes of financial collapse. The system must collapse from within under the weight of its own internal contradiction. This is the only way it's going to work. Those people are fanatics. They are dangerous for themselves and for others. And so I will only end on this particular note. When people try to approach Macron's recent statement about deploying French troops in Ukraine as not being serious in terms of feasibility, military feasibility, you have to understand that you're dealing with the ultimate avatar of an ideology that has been taking hold on the country for the last 230 years, which knows that it's there counted, and that is throwing all its forces into the battle, and no matter what the cost, they will not hesitate a second to deploy troops to serve as a tripwire. Let's not forget the bilateral agreements that were recently signed by 4 of NATO's countries with Ukraine, those mutual assistance treaties. They are designed to get around the NATO unanimous vote requirement. And as such, if it means sacrificing French troops or Polish troops or Italian troops or German troops or UK troops for the financial system, this dying financial squid that is exploiting not only Europe but also Africa for centuries now. It's the same enemy. We have the same enemy. They will do it. They will go all the way. We should not underestimate those people. Their bet is what to get away or to exit this problem, this predicament they are in now. The same way they did it during World War II. They want to try to flip the table, kick the chess game all over, and hope to come out on top once the smoke clears.
Mhm.
Of course, Arnaud, DEVELAY, and everything is happening in a time of changing technological development, and the world is very conversant, and I think it will be easier to understand the stakes and even to advocate principles, especially by opinion leaders, to ensure that we prevent a breakout of another war in the world. I wish to thank you all for your great insight. CHRISTELLE, who is editor-in-chief international reporters, and ACHILLE, EKEU, banker, international financial expert. Thank you for the insight, and also ARNAUD, DEVELAY, a political scientist. It was a great and a constructive moment together, and we continue to hope that this platform will serve us well in changing the opinion of the world, especially as far as geopolitics is concerned, as far as international relations and even globalization is concerned, so that we can make the world a better place for mankind. Thank you for trusting also the Pan-African Television. It is for you media. Remember, it's another view of the world.